Good evening. Welcome to Regent College. We are delighted to be together this beautiful evening here in Vancouver. Welcome to all of you who are here with us in person, and welcome to all of you who join us online anywhere in the world you may be. My name is Pablo. I am a student here at Regent, and also this year's Evening Public Lecture Coordinator. Welcome from Vancouver, this beautiful land where we live, work, worship, and study in the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Coast Salish peoples. Tonight we have a great lecture. If you need to leave this room for whatever reason, we just ask you to be mindful of closing the door, as we are trying to prevent any disruptions from the outside. In the same way, if you have any electronic device that may produce any sound, we will ask you to put it in silent, as we are trying to prevent any disruptions as well to our lecture. Lastly, for those of you who are here in person, just a reminder that we are live streaming and recording this session under the conditions spelled out in the public notice posted on the door as you enter both Regent and this room. At this point, I would like to introduce you our host tonight. Richard Thompson is Director of Advancement here at Regent, and he will be hosting this lecture tonight. Richard.
Well, good evening and welcome. So glad to see you here with us tonight, especially those of you that have gathered with us, but we're also grateful for our online audience. And welcome to a lecture that I promise you will be good and beautiful and true. And you will enjoy this and you will be blessed. So thank you for making the time to be here this evening. What a special delight to have Karen Swallow-Prior back with us. She first taught at Regent 2 summers ago in 2022. And apparently we loved her and she loved us enough such that she's back again. And she's here teaching a course called Christian Poetics. And that is happening Monday to Friday, and today was the first class, and I trust it went well and that you're encouraged. She's giving me the thumbs up, so that's very good to hear. For those of you who are new to our evening public lectures, let me just tell you about the format of the evening for those who have been coming to these for years and years. And yes, there are folks here tonight that have been coming to these for years and years. But for those who don't know, in a moment I will formally introduce Karen Swallow-Prior to you. She will then lecture for anywhere from 50 to 60 minutes, and we will then have a time of question and answer. You provide the questions, she provides the answers, but of course she may ask you a question back if she feels that there's a conversation there to be had, and we leave that to her discretion. And we will aim to conclude our evening by 9 o'clock. Regarding the questions, for those that are gathered here, you'll see there's microphones on either side of the auditorium. We'll invite you to move to those to ask your question. For our online audience, and for anyone here who doesn't wish to stand up in public or for your voice to be heard, you can send in your questions at any point in the evening, beginning right now. Well, it wouldn't make sense to send it right now because you've not heard what she's had to say, but anytime this evening, you just email it to questions@regent-college.edu. And those of you watching online, that should be appearing on your screen right about now. Following our lecture at 9 o'clock, Karen, I believe you're going to make yourself available in the bookstore for a book signing, so you are welcome to join her there to buy a book, get it signed, and maybe have a further conversation. But do keep in mind, she teaches again tomorrow, so we're not going to keep her here late. So Karen, welcome. Very good to have you back with us. By way of introduction, Karen Swallow-Prior is a writer, editor, and speaker, and a columnist for Religion News Service. Her work has appeared in the New York Times and the Washington Post, among others. She has a PhD in English from the State University of New York in Buffalo, and has taught for 25 years at both Liberty University and Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. Literature is her first love. Accounting for the fact that she loves God and loves her husband and loves her friends and family. But literature is a great love of hers, particularly British literature and the early English novel. But she also cares deeply about culture, creativity, and the cultivation of the good life. I think we're going to hear something about that tonight. To that end, she is quite excited about her newest project, which is a Substack website called The Priori. Just a wordplay on her last name, The Priori. You can find that by Googling Karen Swallow Prior, The Priori, or you can remember this, karenswallowprior.substack.com, and that will take you there, which allows her to continue using her gift of teaching in hopes of drawing together a community of people who are similarly interested in reading, literature, and faith. Her latest book is The Evangelical Imagination: How Stories, Images, and Metaphors Created a Culture in Crisis. And her latest Religion News Service article, which I read this afternoon, is absolutely beautiful and moving and well worth a read. When Childless Becomes Grandchildless. An intriguing title and truly a beautiful article. And you can just Google that or go to her website or to Religion News Service and read it there. For those of you keeping score at home, she has 1 husband, 2 dogs, 5 chickens, and countless friends, followers, and fans. And so would you join me in extending a very warm welcome to Karen Swallow Prior.
Thank you so much. That was a warm and lovely welcome. I do love it here at Regent, and thank you for inviting me back. I'm going to give a talk tonight on calling and vocation, and in the interest of full disclosure, this is the subject of my current book project, the manuscript of which is due July 1st. In a few weeks, so I'm approaching the finish line. And I also want to add with that, for that reason, and just because of who I am and what I like to do, I do want to say that I love questions and answers. So please be thinking of those. That's like my favorite part of these things. I love discussion and dialogue even more than me like blabbering on. So do plan to ask some questions and engage in some conversation afterwards. So get those questions ready. So I love to talk about calling. I love to talk about vocation. There are a lot of books out there about the topic. A lot that have been out for a long time, and I'm kind of rereading and revisiting those works, some for the first time, and so I'll be referencing a few of those. But I've also been teaching, as Richard said, for 25 years, mainly college-age students, often older students. But over the years, I've had a lot of conversations with younger people and some older people about calling and vocation. And so a lot of what I'm thinking about and writing about and talking about tonight reflects some of those conversations. And there are timeless questions, and then there are also ones that I think are kind of this time. So one of the things that I want to do in this talk and also in my book is address some of the pressing concerns that I see being expressed today in today's economic climate, job climate, generational tensions, economic problems. And so I'll touch on a little of those, but I really hope to give a talk and write a book that speaks to people of all ages and all situations, because these are questions that we have over the course of our lives, because we don't have just one calling or one vocation. We have multiple ones, and along with those things, we have other sort of tasks that come alongside. So I'm looking forward selfishly in some ways to your feedback and questions, because I'm finishing up my book, so help me with that. So one of the sort of the driving points or questions or expressions that I want to address in the book is this expression that we hear a lot, where we are told to pursue your passion. Or related to that, you might have heard the expression, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. They are lies. Such lies. So first of all, passion and calling are not the same thing. And we live in a culture that tends to think of them the same. And I often hear people, again, especially the younger folks, because you've grown up this way, say that because they have a passion for something, that means they are called to do it. Oh, if only it were so. Now, to be sure, sometimes one is called to do something that aligns with one's passion. And I confess, I have been lucky and blessed enough to have had that for most of my life. So it is true. But it's not always true. And I dare say that in the course of the entirety of human history, it's not often been true for most people who have lived. And I do get that that sounds a little depressing. But before you get up and walk out, please bear with me, because I actually believe that distinguishing between passion and calling can actually help us to pursue both of them more fulfillingly and more faithfully. So that's the first thing. Think about passion and calling as being different. And then second, I want to talk a little bit and think a little bit about work itself. Because guess what? Work is actually good. Work is, not always, but it can be good. It's supposed to be good. And work was actually part of God's original plan, all the way back to the Garden of Eden, even before the fall. In the book, I quote, I'm not going to recite them here because I can't, but I recite lines from Paradise Lost, where Milton portrays Adam and Eve in the garden before the fall. Now, Milton is a Christian, and he's writing about a biblical text and trying to be a faithful Christian, but obviously he's filling in a lot with his imagination, because he's Milton, he gets to do that. But he portrays Adam and Eve as working in the garden, and their work consists of trying to prune and train and cultivate the flowers and the fruit in the garden because it is so abundant. It needs to be put in order, and to be the blooms need to be propped up and held up because there's just so much abundance. So they do this work in that context, which is a very different kind of context than one in which work is scarce, or after the fall, of course, cursed by thorns and thistles. But they did have to work. It was just a different kind of work. So I don't like that expression, like, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I love teaching. In fact, as the saying goes, I do it for free. It's the grading they pay me for. It's work. No, I enjoy grading too. I consider grading a form of teaching for any of my students out there. But again, work is not necessarily a bad thing. But I do want to talk about this thing, passion, because as I said, passion and calling are so often confused. So let's consider that little phrase, follow your passion or pursue your passion. This proverb is repeated so often today, whether expressed in that particular way, verbatim, with that phrase, or just simply portrayed imaginatively through movies and literature where people do that without necessarily using those words. It's so common in our culture today that it's easy to just assume it's a truism, that it's counsel that is timeless and universal and self-evident, but it's simply not. In fact, as sort of life advice, this little phrase is so novel that it really only reached its axiomatic status in the 20th century. Now, I can prove this to you because I'm kind of addicted to the Ngram viewer, the Google, that's about as techie as I get, but I think it's a Google Ngram viewer you can go to it and plug in a word or phrase, and it will tell you how frequently it appears in Google's own vast library of printed material from as far back as 1700 or something till close to a few years ago. So you can plug it in and you can see on on a graph. It's like the only graph I like. I don't really like charts and graphs. But I plugged in follow your passion with the quotation marks. I think I'm using it correctly when I do that. Or pursue your passion into it. And it's really interesting because actually it goes back to 1500 to 2019. And you will find that these phrases are almost non-existent until the 1990s, and then it goes up like a cliff, and then just disappears. It doesn't disappear, but it just kind of goes straight up and then just tapers a little bit. So it's just a new phrase. It's a new idea in terms of being so pervasive. And it's not even self-evident, or at least it's not backed up by the data. So I've been reading, as part of my research, a writer, thinker named Cal Newport. Anybody know about Cal Newport? Yeah, so I don't even know how to describe him. He's a computer science professor at Georgetown, I think is where he is now. And he writes a lot of popular works about work, and he researches work. And he actually says that this idea of pursuing your passion is not only not true, he actually says it's dangerous advice. Now, I've never put it as starkly as that, but that's sort of the view I've held for years after talking to a lot of students, and so based on my anecdotal evidence and sort of my gut instinct, I've just always thought that was not good advice. Newport says it's dangerous, and he cites a lot of research, but one of the interesting and most memorable studies that he cites is a survey done of college administrators. And they chose a category like that because, now, to any college administrators who might be in the room, please don't take offense. But he said, probably nobody grows up going, oh, I want to be a college administrator when I grow up, or an administrative assistant. Like, it's just not something that you picture and develop a passion for. And so they did this survey. It was administrative assistants, I think is what it was. They did this survey of them, and basically the results showed that there were people that they surveyed who saw their post as a job, some saw it as a career, and some saw it as a vocation. And the results showed that the ones who saw that job as a calling or vocation were the ones who'd been doing it the longest. So Newport's point through this research and other research that he cites is that actually people tend to become passionate, and he does a lot more research on his citation, so it's more than this study, but that people become passionate about something when they get good at it, and getting good at it, for most of us, generally takes a long time. It takes some experience. So we grow into it and discover our passions that way. And it's not true of all of our passions, but experience and skill and competency can help us become passionate about things. And that's basically his argument. So let's think about what passion is. It's an intense drive or desire. It's something, sort of in the more literal sense, something that we pine for or suffer for. That's actually the phrase that comes from, ancient history, where we talk about the passion of Christ, whether his actual one or the symphony by Bach, I think it is. That phrase that recurs throughout church history is referring to Christ suffering for us. That's what the Latin root word means, is suffering. And so when we're passionate about something, we actually are suffering for it or because of it or on account of it. So passion is something we are willing to suffer for, or we do suffer for, whether it's our choice or not. And that can, of course, be connected to our calling, but it can be connected to other things. So one thing I want to differentiate out again is the difference between passion and desire. I just said that passion is an intense desire or a driving desire, and it is that. But if we stop and think about desire for a moment, which I think is helpful, it's important to consider how much our desires are not necessarily natural to us, or they come unbidden because they are cultivated by outside or external forces. Now, I'm heavily influenced here by James K.A. Smith. He writes a lot about this. So it's fascinating to think about how our desires are developed, where they come from. And I suspect that the ultimate answer is, like so much of the things about our lives and our personalities, that it is a combination of nature and nurture. It's both, it's not either or. But I like to think, because I read a lot of James K.A. Smith, about how our desires are kind of formed externally, culturally. And so one of my favorite illustrations about this is an old one, a classic one. You probably know about this. It comes from Richard Blackaby's classic text, Experiencing God. And in that, he tells the story of when one of his sons was a little boy, and his birthday was approaching, and the boy wanted for his birthday some cheap toy that his father knew would not last long, would be broken soon, or lose his interest quickly. And what Richard really wanted for his 6-year-old boy to experience and to enjoy was a bicycle. But the boy didn't want this. He just wanted something else. So what Blackaby did is he took the boy by the store, the shop window where the bicycle was on display like every day, and pointed it out, and wow, isn't that a nice bike? And oh, wouldn't you like to have that? So day after day, week after week, he cultivates in his son a desire for this bicycle that before that the boy didn't even know existed or have any ideas about. And then, of course, Blackaby buys the bicycle, puts it away, and lo and behold, on the boy's birthday, what does he get for his birthday? But that thing he really wanted, the bicycle, that his father had cultivated a desire for in his heart, because he knew it was a better gift for his son than his son even knew what to ask for. And of course, the point that Blackaby is trying to make about our desires and God's desires for us is obvious, that God, Blackaby is basically taking that verse in Psalm 37:4 that says, "Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." That's the verse that Blackaby is illustrating. And his point is not that, like, oh, if I take my delight in the Lord, he's going to give me that, new car I want. No, that's not it. If we are delighting in the Lord, our desires will come in alignment with the Lord's, and then we will desire what he wants for us. Now, it's not a perfect analogy. God doesn't make us into robots or anything like that. Not that I can get into that interplay between sovereignty and free will. That's not my point here. But God does want us to desire what he wants for us, and when we draw near to him, that's how it works, and that's how parents can work. And that's not just how God and parents work, but that's also how marketing works too, right? How many of you can sit down and watch something on television and not by the end of it, be desiring the chicken wings that are being advertised? I don't know if that happens here as much, but at home it seems like every commercial is for chicken wings, and I just crave chicken wings. Those are outer sources. And so they work, whether it's to help us to cultivate a desire for chicken wings in us, or to the latest, newest gadget, or the latest version of the iPhone. Maybe this is just me. Maybe I am just more susceptible this way. But it's the chicken wings, it's the new sweater, it's the coat. Can I tell you a story about the coat? Okay. I'm going to tell you a story. This is not a testimony to my character or my virtue or anything like that, but hopefully it illustrates. And I think, so anybody know about Philomena Kunk? Kunk on Earth? Okay, it's hilarious. Language warning for sure, but it's hilarious. It's a parody of it's a mockumentary or a parody of documentary. Okay, so it's just, I can't even explain it. She's a character, anyway. So she's British, and it's giving the whole history of the earth. And so she's pretty cool, and she has this coat that I fell in love with this coat that she wears, like a long kind of plaid trench coat. And I'm pretty good at the Google, and so I wanted this coat really badly. and so I'm Googling, and I can't find anything like this coat that isn't like made in Ireland and costs $600. So I can't find the coat. And believe me, I'm pretty expert at this kind of thing. And I couldn't find it. So I went to Twitter and I found the actress's account. And I asked her where she got the coat. And she answered me, and she told me. And not only did she tell me where she got the coat, but it's like a cheap clothing supplier affordable. And so, of course, it was like several seasons ago because, the show isn't new. And so she told me the brand of the coat. And I went on eBay, and I found the brand and the color and the style of the coat in gently used condition for a steal of a price, and I now own the coat. So that's how my desires are cultivated and fulfilled. I was determined. That coat was calling me, and my determination paid off. Okay, so the whole point is our desires really can be formed in large part, if not most part, by these external forces. Now back a little bit to calling. So the whole point is that as the outer external culture changes, as things in the world change, that's also going to change our own sort of visions for the good life, our own desires. I recall very vividly the first time I heard, actually I think it was a parent, not the child or the young person, but the first time I heard of a young person who wanted to be, when he grew up, a YouTuber. Now, I'm aging myself. I don't think I even had ever watched YouTube at that point, and I was like, I was just floored. I'm like, a kid is dreaming of being a YouTuber when he grows up. I had no way to comprehend that. Of course, now I understand a little bit. There are role models out there who are YouTubing and making a lot of money at it, becoming stars and celebrities. So I sort of get it now. But the first time I heard it, I was just blown away. I mean, this isn't, the firemen and the astronauts of the kids when I was growing up dreamed of being. And so, that's just an example of how, as the culture, our desires change because of what's put in front of us. I mean, do you think that men and women or young girls and boys dreamed of becoming astronauts 200 years ago? No, I don't think so. On the other hand, totally different kind of direction. The number of nuns in America has declined by 76% over the last 50 years. Now, do we have any less need of religious vocations and religious life? Well, not really, but our desire for that kind of lifestyle or that kind of calling has obviously changed. So our desires are changing. There are lots of examples that I could cite, but that's only natural as the world changes. And again, the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes what we think is this desire in us that will fulfill us as a human being can't be, if it wouldn't have fulfilled a human being long ago and won't in a future time, then that's not an automatic guarantee that it will fulfill us or the only thing that can fulfill us. A more humorous example of this that comes from my world of literature, although it's not English literature, but it's still great world literature, is Don Quixote. That classic work that features a man, an errant knight, who's living in this world that is transitioning from the world of chivalry and knighthood and gallantry and adventure into the modern world, and yet he's just holding on. He just wants to be that knight that he has imagined all this time, and of course, and so he finds himself literally within the story, tilting at windmills because he thinks that they are giants that he is fighting. And so that's where that expression comes from, tilting at windmills, because we can see the world through these rose-colored glasses that doesn't reflect reality, and we can have this desire to do this thing that doesn't match up with the real world. That's sort of the point of the story, and also the point I'm trying to make is that our desires and our passions along with them can be much more externally than internally formed than we might often realize. So if we stop to consider for a moment, we could think of many different passions and desires that would not have existed in other times and places in human history and culture, like YouTubing. So let me transition to talking with that kind of in the background about passion and calling and what they are and how limited and how contextualized they are. Let's talk about calling. And because I'm a word person, I like to start with the meaning of a word, and most of you, I'm sure, know this, but the word calling and vocation are used interchangeably because vocation means calling in a literal sense. It comes from the Latin word from which we get the word call, also the word that we get vocal or vocalization from. And so if we stop and think about what calling is on its most literal level, it is really literally something that is audible, something someone calls to us. It's a summons. So a call actually requires a caller and the called. And a calling, again, in its most literal sense, but that's where it's helpful to begin, a call comes from outside of ourselves. That's the thing that I think is most important. Passion comes from inside. Calling comes from outside. If they are the same, wonderful, but they aren't from the beginning, and they might not always be. Anybody, I am sort of like a horror movie buff. Anybody remember that famous line from the movie When a Stranger Calls? The call is coming from inside the house. Do we know this one? Yeah, it's like, when you're a teenage girl and you're babysitting all the time like I was and you like horror movies, that one really sticks with you because it's about a babysitter alone and like someone's calling and the police finally tap the phone and they're like, the call is coming from inside the house. Like that is like the scariest thing. It's an old movie, then they did a remake and anyway. So, but, it's a classic line from a horror movie, but if we think about calling as Christians, the idea that the calling comes from inside us is kind of a horror to think about, right? Because we believe in a God who created us, has a purpose for us, has a call on us, and that the call comes from him. And we also believe that we are not him, right? We are not God. So if we recognize that the call comes from outside and the call ultimately comes from God, even though most often through other things like people and circumstances and all of that gets complicated. I'll get more into that in the book. And from his word, that actually can take a lot of the pressure off, right? I mean, because if it comes from someone else, then, and we know that he is an external, objective, eternal person and presence, then we are looking for a call that comes from him rather than us. Now, it can get tricky because, of course, we can feel the sense or confirmation of call within ourselves. And so we can recognize, and this is touching on a little bit of what we talked about in class today, is that there is a difference between the objective and the subjective, but there's also an interplay between them. And so it can sometimes be difficult to tell when something is just us or something that begins from outside. But again, the important thing is to recognize that we are not God, he is not us, and we're not always called by someone to do what we are passionate about, and nor are we always passionate about what we're called to do. So when people tell me that they feel called or are called to do something, the first question I want to ask, but I don't always, is who is calling you? Because if no one's calling you, then that you are not yet called to do that, at least. So we look to other people and other circumstances to confirm a calling that we might feel. And we can feel a passion for that, and it feels like that's why it's the same thing. But again, they're not the same thing. Where calling and passion are easily confused is that in our correct understanding that we are, each one of us, created uniquely by God. He does knit us together in the womb and designs us each in a unique way according to his purpose. But it is also he who decides when and where and to whom we will be born, and the circumstances in which we will be born and raised and live. And even the time, again, going back to the sort of silly astronaut example, if he knits us together in order to be an astronaut, he's got to have us born, after whatever year astronauts were invented. I don't know, it wasn't that long ago. But for the most part, merely having a desire or passion inside us does not necessarily mean we will receive a call from outside to fulfill that passion. This is ultimately the difference that I'm trying to drill down on, that passion comes from inside and calling comes from outside. I mean, I know, a lot of people have a passion for the Lord of the Rings. I'm not one of them, but a lot of people I know do. And so think about, most of you who have this passion are not going to be called to start writing the screenplay or acting in the films or related, having any kind of role related to the rest of the series. So that's the bad news. So it's fine to tweet about it, read about it, talk about it, whatever, to fangirl about it, fanboy about it. That's a passion, but it's not necessarily a calling. Passions are good, but they're not the same thing as calling. As another example, I have a passion to run. I run, it's slowing down a little bit, but I run almost every day, and I've done so for most of my life, ever since junior high when I tried out for the cheerleading team and I didn't make it. So I joined cross country because they take anybody on cross country. But I wasn't passionate about when I started. I just did it and got better at it, and I was pretty decent for a little, junior high girl in rural Maine running on the D team, not team, what do you call it, the league or class D, right? Do they still use that, based on your school size? We were really small. And so it's just something that has carried me through the rest of my life. And I, but if you ever saw me running now, you'd know, nobody's going to be calling me to run on their team or be a sponsor for their sneakers or anything like that. It's not a calling in that sense. It's just a passion that I have. And there used to be a word that we would use to talk about these things that we do for fun. I mean, it's still there, but you don't hear much about it. And that word is hobby. Does anyone talk about hobbies anymore? I think it might be coming back a little bit because of, social media or something. But it's really a quaint word, but people used to talk about having hobbies. They're just something that you love to do, and you do it because you love to do it, whether you're really good at it or not good at it. And it has nothing to do with getting paid for it. It has nothing to do with having a successful career about it. There's a fancier word that means basically the same thing. It's avocation. So there used to be, we used to talk about a vocation and an avocation. Someone would say, if they're talking about their day job, they say, this is my vocation, and fishing is my avocation. There was sort of a pairing that way, something that you do for a living and something that you do just for fun. Now, vocation, just little note here we can get back to in the Q&A. I mean, vocation is not limited to something that you get paid for. Okay, so we'll have to talk about that later. Someone can be assigned to ask that question. But notice that there's an assumption built into these categories of vocation and avocation that what one does for money is not necessarily what one does out of pure passion and joy, right? That's just a newer possibility, and definitely a possibility, but not a probability, that's sort of been magnified in our social media world. Because again, I've said this before and I'll keep saying it in different ways, but getting paid to do what you love has by far been the very, very, very small exception for most of human history, not the rule. So vocation or calling is not about being able ultimately to fulfill our desires, pursue our passions, or follow our bliss. Vocation is ultimately about being called by others to serve others. And as Christians, or just like as basic, decent human beings, I think we can entertain the possibility that it actually can be desirable, if not something we're passionate about, something that we can take delight in helping others. We can just be glad to be of help, to fill a need. And there's a story that's told in a couple of different sources that illustrates this. Well, actually, no. I want to recall the quote that you may know from Frederick Buechner, his famous quote about vocation. He says, "Vocation is the place where our deep gladness meets the world's need." And that's a beautiful quote because it mentions what I just talked about serving others, but also when he uses the phrase deep gladness, I think there's a difference between that and maybe just passion or desire. I think deep gladness is something that is maybe quieter, more fulfilling, longer lasting than just like a passion that can burn out. Again, we can put a pause on that. I'm going to keep thinking about that for a minute, but I mean, I'll think about it while I continue to talk, but I'm multitasking that way. But anyway, there's this story that I've come across in my research that's really a great illustration of this. It's the story of a guy who is driving somewhere in the middle of the United States on one of those long stretches of road that's a deserted road through the Midlands or something, and he comes, and it's a 2-lane road, and he comes across a spot of construction, and there's basically it's one of those where they've closed one lane, and so they, there's a sign man who's holding a sign that says slow, stop, and so only one lane can pass at a time, and so this guy's waiting in this long line of traffic. He pulls up to the sign, and as soon as he gets to the sign man, he flips it around and says stop, right? So he knows it's going to be a long wait. And so he rolls down his window and he asks the sign man, he's like, how do you stand this? How can you do this job? Like, just stand here all day, turning this line around? Like, don't you get tired of it? And imagine this man's surprise when the sign man says to him, I love my job. He goes, you know why I love my job? Because I love these guys. He goes, and I'm keeping these guys safe, and I'm keeping you safe. And I love doing that. This is important work. And I'm just paraphrasing the story now. But, I mean, imagine, like, this guy loved his job. The man in the car is looking at it, can't imagine it. It reminds me of, like, I notice this a lot now because I've noticed it before. It's part of why I want to write this book. Because, I love what I do, and I don't do very many things, but I love what I do, and the older I get, the less I can imagine doing a lot of things, because you get kind of narrower in your ways, and your comfort, for me anyway, my comfort zone gets narrower. But I love watching people, everyone's not like me. So when I go to the grocery store, and I am in line with a cashier who's just really taking joy in her job and just enjoying talking with people and chatting with people and, checking us out. Like, I notice that. I'm like, she's really enjoying this. And I love that. I remember one time we live in Virginia, paradise, except for all the bugs and the insects and the rodents and the whatever, and we live in an old house too, so we have the services of an exterminator every month for various causes. And I remember one time we were having a particular pest problem. I don't remember what it was. And I remember the exterminator came in, and he was so excited about figuring out how to get rid of whatever these pests. He was so excited, and I loved that. He was living for solving this problem. So there are so many people who can do so many different things and take joy out of those things that it's really oftentimes our own limited imaginations that can't see how they could do that. But more importantly, we're projecting ourselves and thinking, well, I couldn't live that way. But you know what? According to Cal Newport, you could, and you could enjoy it if you got experienced at it and skilled at it and knowledgeable enough about it. Not everything, because we're all made certain ways. But again, to go back to the sign man, I doubt that guy grew up as a little boy going, I can't wait to hold a sign on the highway. It probably wasn't something he dreamed of and had a passion about the first day that he went to work, but he fell in love with the work because he understood the need that he was fulfilling, and that gave him deep gladness. As Gustav Wingren explains in his canonical book, Luther on Vocation, God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does. And I love what Andrew Peterson says in his book, Adorning the Dark. If you know, Andrew Peterson is a musician and, like a real Renaissance man in general. But he writes about the arts and music in particular. And there's a quote from there about art, but I think it's true of all callings. He says, art shouldn't be about self-expression or self-indulgence. Art shouldn't be about self. The aim ought to be for the thing to draw attention ultimately to something other than the self. Now, as Christians, we know what that ultimate other thing should be. First God, of course, and then neighbor. The irony that Peterson points out is that we are most ourselves when we are thinking least about ourselves. Now, again, he's talking about the artistic vocation and creativity, but I think that kind of art and that kind of creativity can and should apply to all our callings. And so that's where I'm kind of segueing into the good, the true, and the beautiful. Thinking about calling as an art and fulfilling our calling in terms of being an artist, I think, is illuminating. Every good artist must serve the art in order to create good art. And what is good art? That's the question I'm taking a week to discuss in my Christian poetics class. What is good literature? So we're not going to answer that exactly tonight. But good art, in short, is art that is not only good, but true and beautiful too, because it points to the source of all goodness, truth, and beauty. And that is what we are all called to do. We are all called to create works of goodness, truth, and beauty, to live lives that display the goodness, truth, and beauty of our Lord in whatever we do. Being made in the image of our Creator, we are all called to be like Him. Creating is one way we do that, but work is another kind of creativity. We don't always think about them the same way. In order to do anything well, whether it is creating or playing or reading or learning or cultivating our hobbies, we have to put in some effort. We have to work it. To work well is to pursue the true, the good, and the beautiful in some way. And I think one of the most reliable ways that we can find our calling, to hear the one that is calling us, is first to pursue goodness, truth, and beauty. If we pursue that first in whatever we are doing, wherever we are doing it, we will find our calling. So let me just briefly, in a few minutes, tell you what truth, goodness, and beauty are. Not really. We'll just I'll give you some random thoughts about them. I mean, what is truth? Pontius Pilate asked the same thing, and I think he really wanted to know, actually. So I don't know. I'm just going to, I'll tell you a couple things I think are true about truth. Truth is freeing. It is the way in which we are to walk. It is a belt that girds us. It is both spirit and flesh. Truth is life that defeats death, and it is light that overcomes darkness. Because truth is transcendent, it's eternal, absolute, and universal, we will never, in our finite forms, grasp it completely. We are individual, subjective, and finite. Or another better way, I suppose, of saying this is that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And it's all of those words, emphasis on all of those words. There are a lot of ways to think about that verse, and one is simply the acknowledgement that we don't know what God knows, and we need to respect that. You know that common saying, if you're a student, you know the saying, like the more you know, or the more you learn, the more you know how much you have to learn. Right, I mean, that's just, it's not just a saying, it's an experience that we have. So if you think about an area of expertise that you have or you're developing, whether in school or work in life, you know that. You know that the more knowledge you gain in that area, the more you understand how unfathomable are the depths of that subject, whether it's rocket science, the mating rituals of songbirds, or vegetable gardening. Like the more you know you need to know. And so that kind of fear and respect, if we understand that God knows everything, the more that we know, the more we can realize how difficult it is to know everything or to be God. And yet, we are to try. We are to pursue truth, both our understanding of it and our application of it. I think, in a way, pursuing truth is like sort of stepping on stepping stones that are in the middle of a running stream, each one of them slippery, but each one of them leading ultimately to an end, like we are, going through a flowing river and trying to find a destination. Truth might be at the end, but we just have to keep going and make sure we don't slip along the way. We can pursue it just one stone at a time, trying to make sure that our foot is secure with each step that we make, each time it lands, until we reach the next stone. I mentioned before that truth is transcendent. The philosophical term for truth and beauty and goodness is that they're called transcendentals, which is a fancy way that the philosophers from ancient times talked about things that need no justification or no explanation. They are ultimate ends in themselves. Like no one needs to explain why goodness is good or truth is good or the beautiful is good. We just know that they are good. We don't have to explain why truth matters. I suppose a true nihilist might try to deny it, but even people who are trying to obscure or cover up or deny the truth are doing so as an implicit acknowledgement of how important the truth is. One does not attempt to suppress something that one sees as meaningless. So we all know that truth is important. And truth, of course, has always existed and always will exist, but I think our understanding of it culturally, socially, takes on a particular relationship within our own context. So we actually have certain views or different views in certain historical moments. So truth doesn't change, but our understanding does. And what I'm kind of trying to lead to is that as Christians living in the late modern age, we've been informed by a notion of truth that is closely aligned to what is factual, what is empirical. In fact, it's so interesting that the word science, which comes from a Latin root word that means simply to know, has, as a result of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment come to mean a certain kind of knowledge, right? I mean, scientific knowledge, which is a redundancy, actually. So in other words, what I'm saying is a word that once meant all knowledge now means a certain kind of knowledge, which implies that that certain kind of knowledge is the only kind that really matters. Before that word shift occurred, the term natural philosophy was used to refer to what we now call science. I hope this is making sense. But a whole worldview shifting is reflected in the way that we change that word science. Now only one kind of knowledge is counted as knowledge. And so, we've narrowed our understanding of knowledge to sort of the facts, the verifiable, empirical truths. But we, of course, as Christians, we know truth is much more than that. We know that there's much more to knowledge and to wisdom than scientific facts. We know that there's truth with a capital T. And it's truth that helps us to make sense of those facts, how to put them together and apply them. Truth is what helps us to make meaning, something we do simply because we are human and we're made in the image of God. I mean, birds are the nest-making animal, fish are the water-breathing animal, cats are the claw-kneading animal, and human beings are the meaning-making animal. It's what we would do. We were made to seek truth. We were made to make meaning. And truth exists beyond our own individual subjective experience of the world. And even the philosophers that I mentioned before in the pre-Christian world, they knew that. They knew that the material world points to transcendentals that go beyond the material. And this is actually, now I'm not a Bible scholar here, so someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is a pretty basic thing. This is actually, when the New Testament was being written, when the Gospels were being written, and even later Paul, a lot of the language that is used is language that is drawn from the Greek philosophers, including the word logos in John 1:1, which refers to Jesus, the Word. It's a Greek word whose meaning includes and covers even more than just the word truth. It's the kind of truth that even the pagan philosophers knew existed beyond the material facts. And so understanding and pursuing truth in general is part of finding our calling. Okay. Little slip there, Freudian slip. And so to talk about goodness, I would define goodness in very general terms as truth made manifest. So truth is sort of out there, abstract, and goodness is an embodiment or manifestation of truth. And the faithful Christian life requires more than mere knowing. It's not just head knowledge. Goodness is doing. It's doing truth. And God himself exemplifies this idea of good in his dynamic acts of creation that began in Genesis and continue in our lives and in the world today. Indeed, in the Genesis account where God uses the word good to refer to his creation, it's a Hebrew word, and I draw from a great book by William Durness called Visual Faith, Art, Theology, and Worship and Dialogue, where he does this word study of the Hebrew words throughout the Bible that express goodness and beauty. He says that in that account, the word, when God says creation is good, it's a Hebrew word that means both morally good and aesthetically good. Like it's both of those things. It kind of like it captured, like we still have that sense even in English, because if you have an experience like a movie or a concert or a meal and someone says, "How was it?" and you say, "It was good." Usually, there might be, clarifications you make later, but usually when you just say something was good, you usually mean both. Like it was satisfying in every way, morally, aesthetically, taste, if you're talking about a meal. And so we still carry that sense of goodness being an all-encompassing, not just moral, but also aesthetic form of goodness. And yet, as I mentioned in class today, we often, in the modern world, confuse the difference between the statement, "It is good," and "I like it," right? The difference between those two phrases is a whole world. It's the world of objective reality and truth and subjective experience. So the more we recognize the difference between something's goodness and our own subjective taste for it, the better able we are to pursue the transcendental sense of goodness. And we know we live in a world where it's, often people will say they can't judge whether something is good or not. And so that's, we know we can, but we focus so much on moral goodness and moral evil that we often forget that we can also make judgments of goodness about other things as well, other transcendentals. But yet, it's hard because even truth is experienced and understood subjectively or phenomenologically. So it's not always easy to make a confident assessment of whether something is good or not. And that's okay. We still ought to try. Okay, just a couple words about beauty, because, all right, and then questions, I always I'm way over-prepared. Okay, so beauty. The things that I just said about goodness, about the difficulty because of the difference between objectivity and subjectivity, are hardest when it comes to beauty. Again, that's the class that I'm talking about this week. We're talking about developing tools for judging the literary aesthetics of a work. And we've been taught, since the 18th century that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but that idea only developed in the 18th century. It was not an idea that the ancients had. There actually was an understanding that beauty has objective qualities that we can judge. There are lots of ways to express those. I'm just going to quickly name those that are most famous, made most famous by Thomas Aquinas, who identified the properties of beauty as proportion, luminosity, and integrity. Now, we're talking, he's talking most literally about, say, a painting that should have proportion, luminosity, and integrity. And it's hard enough to apply those things to a work of art, especially if we're not trained in that. But let's just think quickly about those qualities of beauty as they apply to our lives and then our calling. Proportion alone is worth thinking about a lot, especially in the context of our calling and our callings. We may have a calling in our lives that shifts over time, or other parts of our lives shift over time. And so if we think of proportionality as the amount of time that is properly due to one thing versus another. So you may be in a season of life where you must put a certain proportion of time into your work. But then you might be in another time where your family needs a greater proportion. Making that judgment of proportionality is an ongoing task that we are responsible to undertake over the course of our lives. And if we seek proper proportion, we're actually pursuing beauty in what we do in our callings and in our lives. Because we are called to so many things. We're called to family relationship, to citizenship, to our vocation, to be neighbors and friends, all of those things. And the proper proportion gives beauty to those things. Luminosity is a fancy word for light or illumination. And I think there are lots of ways to think about the way our work and our callings can bring light or be enlightening. Some other words that I think are evoked by luminosity are incandescence and glowing, clarity. And with all those words in mind, we can think about how the work we do, whether we understand it to be our calling yet or not, or our passion yet or not, if we are bringing light and illumination and clarity. I mean, think of a preacher who rightly handles the text of God's word, he's bringing clarity. A teacher brings clarity and illumination not only to the subject, but also to other subjects that are related, bringing light to the world. If I think of, I don't really want to, but I might think about people in public work, like politicians or other public servants. If you've heard the expression, bringing more light than heat, that's an example of luminosity. Again, a word that applies to beauty that can be applied to our lives. And then the third quality of beauty that I think we can think about is that Aquinas mentions is integrity. Now, integrity has a moral component that's pretty obvious, like being honest and having integrity in our work, and that's a way to bring beauty to our roles. But there are other ways too. I mean, if we think of integrity as wholeness, bringing our whole selves to what we do. And I think of a colleague of mine that I had for many years, a fellow English teacher who didn't have the most advanced degree, but was a passionate, wonderful teacher. And the thing that made her so great is that she was a mom first, and she brought all of her mothering to the classroom. And you know who was the best professor in the English department who could teach the football players? Her. Because she just was a mother to them. She brought her whole self to her work, and that is what made her so good at her work. And that's an example that I think of a different kind of integrity that we might think of. Okay, so beauty, finally, there's so much I want to cover. The final point I want to make about beauty is, again, has to do with its etymology, the word, the Greek word, kalon, which is related to the word calling, but it's also a word for beauty. And it's sort of not a proven etymological connection, but it's a rich one, that beauty calls. Beauty calls us simply by being beautiful. It attracts. I mean, we know how that works, in the human level. That's what beauty does. But all of the beauty attracts. I was brought these beautiful flowers tonight. And that is just an example of how easy it is to pursue beauty in our lives in a way that we might not automatically do, but once we think about it, it can be easy to do. Beauty, simply by being beautiful, the thing of beauty calls us to it, draws us near, attracts. The sunrise calls us, the sunset calls us, the mountaintop vista calls us, the peony calls us, the impressionist painting calls us, the beautiful man or woman calls us. And that's one sense of beauty, the visual kind. But there's a metaphorical sense of beauty that also carries with it that same sense of calling and drawing and attraction. Moral beauty attracts us too. The wise teacher draws us in. The kind neighbor is welcomed. The just man wins us over. The worker who cares about the quality and integrity of her work attracts our business. We enjoy a beautiful friendship. We are drawn to the person with a beautiful spirit. Everyone loves the person with a beautiful soul. These are the things that are seen not only by the eyes, but when seen, they please, which is Aquinas' shortest definition of beauty, that which upon being seen pleases. These kinds of qualities of beauty beckon us. They call us. So let us heed this calling, no matter our vocation, our job, our station, or our stage in life. We are all called to pursue the good, the true, and the beautiful. Let us answer the call. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you for the beautiful flowers. And I've never been at a lecture where you've not had a really intriguing question, but hold that question before I give the instructions. Thank you, Karen, for the beautiful lecture. This was a lovely evening and so enlightening. You gave us lots of light, and we're grateful for that. like Daniel, who has moved to the microphone, that's how we would invite you to ask your questions if you wish to do it in person. And if you're online, or if you're here and just wish to do it online, questions@regent-college.edu is the email address. When you move to the mic, ask your question. After Karen's answer, there might be a natural follow-up question, and we would welcome that as well. But then maybe limit your questions to just those two for the sake of others. But if there's no one at the mic, we might invite you to ask a third or to have a conversation. Anyways, Daniel, our flower bringer, bring the first question.
Well,
Thanks.
they are Annie's homegrown flowers, so I can't claim all the beauty in the household. That's for sure. Thank you for the lecture, and I really appreciated how you exegeted Buechner's famous quote about the deep gladness, because I think in reading, I've heard that so many times. I've applied it to churches, by the way. I think a church's vocation is recognizing its own. You can apply this.
I have that in the book, yeah.
Okay. You can apply this to communities as well as to individuals. But I think because of that sense of pursue your dream that's been so much a part of our culture, I've always read that as like, oh gosh, like what am I going to find? What is my deep calling? And you've helped show how that can be applied to more mundane callings as well. But I wonder if you would be up for speaking a little bit about how you've personally thought about this as vocations shift. And I understand that your vocation has shifted in the last few years, and not necessarily by your own choosing. And so what happens when
Oh, I chose, just
you
to be
chose.
clear, but yeah. The factors of my choice were not of my choosing.
Right. But yeah, can you just talk a little bit about what happens when your chosen vocation is unavailable or it has to shift?
No, it's a good question, and without getting into all the details of my story, which some of you, well, no one knows all of them, but some of it is public. I mean, I just basically left a teaching position and a 25-year academic career to now be on my own, sort of, just because of the various things shifting within the church today and tensions and things like that. And so I literally did have to ask myself, what is my calling, right? Because am I giving up my calling by doing this, or am I actually pursuing my calling? And we can talk about it more later. But part of that, and this is what I think might be helpful to some people who are grappling with this, is like, is my calling teaching in a college as a professor, which I did want to think that it was, and maybe it was, or is my calling teaching in general, or through writing and through other things. So sometimes it's the words, right? It's the categories and the definitions, because I can still and am still doing that, that broader calling, and so it's a slight shift in understanding my vocation. But then also I do believe that some of our vocations can change. So if we think of our family vocations, like if I'm a daughter and I'm lucky enough to still have my parents with me, so I still have that vocation, but someday I may not have. So sometimes some vocations do end, and sometimes it's just a sort of realignment of understanding that the words we thought described our vocation actually is something slightly different. That's sort of the short answer. Good question.
Thank you. Next question up here, please.
Hi, Karen. Thanks very much for a good, true, and beautiful talk. As I was looking at the title of your talk and the topic of it, the good and the true seemed more sort of obvious, and the beautiful was more challenging for me for a few reasons. So I'm a physics professor at a Christian university, and they're the unbeautiful parts of the job. So assigning the failing grade that needs to happen, or dealing with academic dishonesty, these kinds of things. And I guess I do appreciate the way that you built in like Aquinas's proportion, luminosity, and integrity. The integrity especially made me think, okay, maybe that is beautiful to give a failing grade when needed, and to work with a student through having them recognize academic dishonesty and so forth. But So I definitely appreciate that. I wonder if you could maybe reflect a bit more on how beauty works itself out in the not beautiful parts of our jobs, and maybe even in terms of art. Art is not. I mean, sometimes people think art has to look nice, but sometimes art has to depict horrible things, and it has to challenge us to think about justice and how injustice occurs and so forth. And so sometimes Christian art is sort of our artists are told, make sure your painting looks nice, otherwise we can't hang it up in our gallery at our university or whatever. So I wonder if you could just talk a bit more about the beauty and how it doesn't have to be like nice or appealing in terms of the difficult parts of our jobs.
Yeah, no, those are great questions, and they're actually very related, almost like one question. So I think this is why it's important, and this question is helping me to with my book. So thank you as I finalize this. So this is why truth, goodness, and beauty can't be separated, right? Because something is not beautiful if it's not true, and so not all truths are pleasant or easy or comforting. And so a painting, a painting of the crucifixion or a depiction of the crucifixion can be beautiful because it's well done, but also because it's true. And this is a whole other area of discussion, but I'll just throw it in as a side note. Like that's why there's a big difference between Catholic and Protestant art. I'm Protestant, by the way, but so I get to critique the Protestants. But so Protestants, again, these are very general terms, but Catholic art focuses on the crucifixion, the passion of Christ. On Protestants, we have Christ is off of the cross. And there are theological reasons for that, but there are also implications that go along with this. Like if we skip over the suffering, we skip over the sacrifice, we want, and at an extreme, it can just become cheap grace, right? And now you can go in extremes in the other way, but we can't separate beauty from truth. And so the beauty of giving a truthful grade can result in goodness, right, in the end. We opened my class today talking about Philippians 4:8, which has that nice list of the qualities of things we are to think on. And the ones that I find a lot of the one word Christians often want to skip is the one about whatsoever is true, right? Not whatsoever is comforting and makes me feel good, but true. And a lot of truths are hard and harsh. So something can't be beautiful if it overlooks the truth. And my favorite whipping boy, is Thomas Kincaid, the painter of light, whose paintings are all cozy, of cottages that are comforting and not beautiful, right? Because they don't show truth. But we have all kinds of examples of sentimental art that makes us feel good but skips over the truth. We have to have. I mean, this is the Dutch masters, if they painted a picture of a picnic, might have ants on the blanket or something. Like somewhere in there, a little reminder that the world is not perfect; it is fallen, and that's the truth of it. I don't know. Those are my brief thoughts. Thank you.
Demo? Do you have a question? Please.
Thank you, Dr. Pryor. You spoke earlier about desires and that they're often cultivated by our environment and by external societies. And oftentimes I think we are aware that our desires are being cultivated or impressed upon by our external societies, but I've been thinking about all the times when we're not aware that our desires are being cultivated. So should we try to guard ourselves against that, and how would we do that?
That's a great question. And actually, that's sort of like what my whole book, The Evangelical Imagination, is about, because it's one aspect of that. Because one way of thinking about what you just talked about is the unexamined assumptions that we carry because of the stories and the images and the metaphors and narratives that are circulating around us, so we just sort of adopt them. Like, the easy example I used tonight was beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You hear that once and you think it's the truth, and you never, unless you study art history and cultural history and the history of ideas, you don't realize, oh no, this is just, a Kantian expression of, categories and subjectivity. But, so if the first step is knowing that we are shaped and formed by everything around us, and if we recognize that, we have that awareness, that self-awareness, and then we can just start sort of examining. In some way, right now I'm not saying anything you don't know, but maybe a different application I'm just thinking of is this hyper-polarized culture that we are in now. Is actually, it's so polarized that it's an exaggerated picture of how we're being formed, right? So in some ways, we're being faced with a magnifying glass that can actually, I think, help some of us see more how this works, because it's working in such dramatic ways. That we're being formed by the latest, the tweet or narrative or meme. But it's always been that way in subtler forms, with subtler media and subtler influences. So the first step is just knowing that this is happening, and then asking, like saying, oh, is this saying true? Is this image or this picture true? And we don't do that unless we want to, and we don't do that unless we're in conversation with people who maybe have different experiences and assumptions. And we're willing to listen to where their assumptions came from versus where ours. So it's it has to be a very deliberate, intentional act, but it's also one, the good news is, I think we can model it for other people. We can model it easily in our personal lives and in our public lives. And modeling is important because that's exactly what does it in the first place. Right? What does it in the first place is that advertisement for the chicken wings. Well, you can be an advertisement for introspection and self-examination. So that's how to change it, I think.
Go ahead, please.
Hi. I have a question. Hopefully, it's kind of two parts. But in thinking about calling, my experience in Christianity is it's a little bit of a double-edged term, in that it can be used either externally or internally to manipulate somebody into potentially staying in a situation like workplace, ministry, that is not great for them, that maybe they're not actually called to.
I'm not hearing you though. Did you use the word manipulate?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good.
And so there's the beautiful thing of being called into something and finding a lot of meaning in that work, but then there's also the other side of it where that kind of language or terminology can be used to take advantage of somebody, and that might come from an internal place as well. I've experienced I'm sort of manipulating myself into believing something is a calling, because there's such a desire to have this kind of experience of the merging of your passion, your vocation, and your work. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, and whether goodness, truth, and beauty might be tools with which we're able to help discern the boundaries of what a calling might look like for us.
Yeah, okay, good. I caught most of the words, but I might not have caught them all, so just steer me in the right direction if you need to. So this point about manipulation is really important, and I heard you saying that like other people can say, oh, you're called to do this, right? And so, again, manipulation can, how can I manipulate you? Let me count the ways, right? I mean, it is pervasive, especially, in church culture, I would say, because there's so many ways to prey on good things and distort good things. So that is a reality I want to acknowledge, and then another point that I made can also be manipulated. When I was saying we might not always be passionate about our calling or like it, that's a point can be like, oh no, I just need to be the servant here. I need to be the martyr. That's also not good or healthy. And so I don't know that I have a direct answer, but what you're asking me makes me want to make sure I address this in my book, is like really what is a calling and what is it not, and how do we test and discern it? And my short, sort of off the cuff answer is, it really has to be, we have to find our calling in healthy community, right? I was going to say community, but some communities are unhealthy. So it can't be just one person, one leader telling us that. We have to also ask other trusted advisors in our lives, and assuming that you have a community that, different components of it, and at least some of them are healthy, we have to ask it of them as well. And I mean, even the process I went through just figuring out my vocation when I was, leaving what I thought it was, I mean, I don't think I would have made the right decision if it wasn't for trusted people in my life who were telling me things that I didn't want to to recognize because it was just hard and painful. So I think it is very much in community, healthy community, that we can test that. I'm going to keep thinking about that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have time for probably 2 more questions, and I see that Andrea moved up there. Do you have a question, Andrea? And there's an online question, but we'll take these final 2. Pablo with the online question, and then Andrea. And if you had a question that didn't get answered, hopefully you can talk to Karen afterwards. So just for the sake of our time, thank you.
Yes, we have an online question from Melissa, who writes, I liked the idea of deep gladness. Maybe the distinction between passion and vocation is that passion is self-serving, and vocation is generally helping others. If that is the case, why do people want their passions to become their vocations if they can potentially get more fulfillment pursuing a vocation? Is it our instant gratification culture?
Okay, did you hear the whole thing? I couldn't hear it.
And not all of it.
I can't repeat it again.
Yeah, a little bit louder too.
Yes.
Just please, thank you.
So I like the idea of deep gladness. Maybe the distinction between passion and vocation is that passion is self-serving and vocation is generally helping others. If that's the case, why do people want their passions to become their vocations if they can potentially get more fulfillment pursuing a vocation? Is it our instant gratification culture?
And the last part was what?
Instant gratification.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, that's a really good question. That is something I plan to press into more. Is I actually am finding some, there's actually a millennial who came to this conclusion. She wrote a book called Once in a Millennial, very fascinating, where she actually made the decision to take a job, and it's not isolated. She decided to take a job that wasn't her passion, because she wanted to spend her free time pursuing her passion, right? And so there's a kind of burnout that occurs when you're putting, all your eggs in one basket. And so, it's an interesting question, and it's very much comes from a set of certain cultural expectations that are, as I said before, relatively new, that our jobs should be fulfilling our passion. That's new. It hasn't always been that way. It won't always be that way. Again, it's not that it's wrong. It's just a sort of the fact that it's become a standard expectation. And it's one just, it's another unexamined assumption that we need to examine. Why that has become the case, I think, is largely because of false models and images that have been put up in social media that get magnified. But I think it's a good, healthy thing to ask. Do I want to pursue my passions outside my job? And is that a better way of leading a more fulfilling life? If I think I understood the question. Thank you.
Andrea, the last question is yours.
Mine is quite similar. So if somebody else wants to take the last question, I don't want to take it. Go ahead. Okay. So thank you, Karen, for traveling here and sharing with us today. I work with students from around 18 to 25.
Okay, it's the mic.
Just,
You
yeah,
have to
move-
get really close
stand
to the
right in
mic
front of
for
the
me
mic.
to hear you.
Thank
Can you
Sorry.
hear me now?
There, yeah.
Thank you. I work with students from about 18 to 25, as well as people who are experiencing homelessness, who we're helping them that once they've got established, the only thing that changes is their address, but they have a community to do life with, and they're trying to figure out vocation. And what are they to do next? You worked with students, and so my big question is, how do we help as the community be the people to help our friends identify their calling? How have you done that with your students?
I mean, so there's so many different categories of people that we're serving, right? And so when I would work with college students who, just because they're in college, they're already like way privileged, right? So I would tell them that. And I would say, if you have this privilege of pursuing a college degree, you actually have an obligation, I think, to follow your interests and desires for these 4 years, because you can major in anything, and then to develop them and see how they can serve others. Other people who you said they're homeless, right? Okay, so so in some ways, I think our counsel to people who are not in such a privileged position is to really develop sort of themselves, right? Develop their skills and abilities. And that might not be something, it's not so much about their passion, but it's about empowering them to get to a place where they can learn more about who they are. And again, I don't want to err into the martyrdom problem, but I think part of the reframing we need to do now in this cultural moment is to think about how can my gifts and my abilities serve others, again, without being a martyr, but just simply because this is the way I'm made and this is what I'm good at. So it's a lot about finding out who we are. And that's a process for all of us, and sometimes it takes us longer than others. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for your presence here tonight. It is a great encouragement, and yes, you could have all stayed home and watched it online, but it really means a lot to Karen and to all of us at Regent to have people here in the building, real human beings with which you can see and interact. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your wonderful questions. If you didn't get the chance to ask your question, or if you weren't fully satisfied with the answer, I'm pretty sure that Karen would be happy to engage with you in conversation at the bookstore. And that, by way, is also a segue to say, please do allow her to make her way out of here to the bookstore, and don't stop her right here in these steps to ask your question or for further clarification. But the building will be open for at least another half hour, and so you're welcome to meet her there. And if you've asked her a question, please make sure you leave your name with her so that you find your way into her acknowledgments of her forthcoming book, because we've all helped her write that tonight, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay,
yes,
very good.
yes.
So thank you for your participation. Another group that I always wish to thank when we have these evenings is our global community of donors and supporters. It is their generous support that makes it possible for us to offer this ministry to the church, not just locally here in the Lower Mainland, but around the world. If you found tonight worthwhile and you think it's important for Regent to continue to offer these free evening public lectures, there's a donation box at the back if you're one of those rare people that still carries cash. But for those who are online, you can go to rgnt.net/give and make a donation that way. Just a couple other quick announcements before we all join together in saying thank you to Karen. This lecture tonight will be, you can watch it and you can forward it on to your friends. It'll be available on our YouTube channel probably within about 24 hours. And you can just Google, and rather, I won't give you the whole address, but you can just Google Regent College YouTube. It'll take you right to our YouTube channel. And all tonight's video and every evening public lecture this spring and summer will be available till August 31st. And then later, you would have to go through Regent Audio to watch those. I would invite you to all come back on Wednesday night when Professor Douglas Moo, who is here teaching a 2-week course, he's halfway through the book of Romans. I don't know if he's actually halfway through that book, but he's halfway through the course on the book of Romans. He'll be here on Wednesday night to lecture Full and Final Forgiveness, the Unique Perspective of Hebrews. So we welcome you back here at 7:30, and that lecture as well will be available online. And Karen, the one question that you didn't get asked that we all really want to know is, you told us, or you told me, and I told everyone, that you own 5 chickens. Do those chickens, are they aware of your passion for chicken wings? Okay, no, that's not important. What is more important, the better question is, did you experience deep gladness tonight in meeting our need for a fuller, more comprehensive understanding of calling and passion, vocation, avocation? Did you experience that deep gladness? Because we were deeply glad to be here tonight.
I was deeply, deeply glad. Deep gladness. Thank you.
Wonderful. Would you join me in thanking Karen? Thank you and good night.